The year was 1843, and London society sparkled with the usual winter festivities. Crystal chandeliers blazed in grand ballrooms as the aristocracy flitted from one engagement to another, oblivious to the biting cold that gripped the streets beyond their heated carriages. For most, it was a season of joy and possibility. For Alexandra Zimmerman, it was the season of her surrender. She stood before her bedroom mirror, examining her appearance with critical eyes. At 26, she was what society had cruelly deemed a spinster, though her reflection showed a woman of quiet beauty, dark chestnut hair arranged in a simple yet elegant style, intelligent hazel eyes, and a graceful figure that had once drawn admiring glances. Before the scandal, before her disgrace, "Are you certain you wish to attend, Miss Zimmerman?" her lady's maid asked, adjusting the modest pale blue gown that Alexandra had chosen. "I have little choice in the matter, Mary." Alexandra's voice carried the practiced composure she had cultivated over 5 years of social exile. "My cousin has made it quite clear that my presence is required if I am to continue residing under his roof." The bitter truth hung unspoken between them. After her father's death last spring, Alexandra had discovered that his gambling debts had stripped away everything: their modest country home, their savings, and any hope of independence. Cousin Edward had offered shelter, but his charity came with conditions. Alexandra must re-enter society, make an advantageous match, and restore some fragment of family honor. "Perhaps it will not be as dreadful as you fear," Mary offered, though her tone lacked conviction. Alexandra's lips curved into a humorless smile. "The Countess of Harrington's winter ball. I imagine it shall be precisely as dreadful as I fear." She fastened a simple pearl pendant around her neck, one of the few pieces of jewelry she had managed to save from her father's creditors. "However, I have learned to endure much worse than whispers and cold stares." What Alexandra did not say, what she scarcely acknowledged even to herself, was how desperately she wished to believe that tonight might somehow be different. That someone might see beyond the tattered remains of her reputation to the woman she had become. It was a foolish hope, and Alexandra knew better than to indulge it. Love and respect were luxuries denied to women like her, women who had once made terrible, trusting mistakes. "Miss Alexandra," her cousin's wife's shrill voice called from below, "the carriage awaits. We shall be unfashionably punctual if we delay further." Alexandra drew a steadying breath. "Remember," she murmured to herself, "you need only endure until spring. By then, you will have saved enough from your illustrations to secure modest lodgings." The thought of her secret work, botanical illustrations commissioned under a male pseudonym, gave her the courage to turn from the mirror and face the evening ahead. The Harrington estate blazed with light, a glittering monument to aristocratic excess. Footmen in powdered wigs guided guests from their carriages, while inside, the cream of London society preened and postured beneath gleaming chandeliers. Alexandra followed her cousin and his wife, keeping her eyes lowered as they entered the grand ballroom. "Smile, for heaven's sake," her cousin's wife hissed. "You look as though you're attending a funeral rather than the most coveted invitation of the season." Alexandra obediently curved her lips upward, though the expression never reached her eyes. She had perfected the art of invisibility, of existing at the periphery of rooms, of avoiding direct gazes, of becoming so still and quiet that eventually people forgot she was there at all. "Lord and Lady Whitmore," the herald announced as her cousin and his wife swept forward. There was a barely perceptible pause before he added, "Miss Alexandra Zimmerman." The subtle hesitation spoke volumes. Even the servants remembered her scandal. Alexandra kept her chin level as she descended the steps into the ballroom, feeling the weight of curious gazes. 5 years had passed since she had trusted the honeyed words of Sir James Hawthorne. 5 years since she had been discovered in his embrace during Lady Pembroke's summer garden party. 5 years since Sir James had laughingly dismissed her as an eager conquest, while society turned its back on the ruined daughter of an indebted gentleman. She had learned her lesson well. Love was for the fortunate and the foolish. Alexandra Zimmerman was neither. Miss Zimmerman, the Countess of Harrington, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her reputation for social cruelty, extended her hand with glacial politeness. "How unexpected to see you this season." "Your invitation was most gracious, Lady Harrington," Alexandra replied, her voice quiet yet clear. She offered the perfect curtsy, neither too deep, which would suggest obsequiousness, nor too shallow, which would hint at disrespect. Yes, well, the Countess's gaze flicked dismissively over Alexandra's simple gown. I do believe in Christian charity during the festive season. Do enjoy yourself, though perhaps not too much. The barbed reminder of Alexandra's past indiscretion hung in the air as the Countess turned to greet more favored guests. Alexandra retreated to the edge of the ballroom, seeking the relative safety of a shadowed alcove. From this vantage point, she could observe the glittering spectacle while remaining largely unnoticed. Young debutantes fluttered like butterflies in their pastel silks, while ambitious mamas calculated bloodlines and fortunes with predatory precision. Gentlemen lounged in elegant indolence or prowled the perimeter in search of beauty and dowries. And then he entered, and the entire atmosphere of the room shifted. "The Duke of Lytharby," the herald announced, his voice carrying over the momentary hush that had fallen. Lord Lucian Lockwood, the 8th Duke of Lytharby, stood at the top of the stairs, surveying the assembly with cool detachment. Tall and commanding, he cut an imposing figure in impeccable formal attire. His dark hair was styled according to current fashion, though without the excessive pomade favored by younger gentlemen. His features were aristocratic and severe, a straight nose, a firmly set jaw, and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they beheld with ruthless precision. Alexandra had never met the Duke, though his reputation preceded him. Widowed young after a brief, childless marriage, he had spent years abroad before returning to England 2 months ago. Rumors swirled about his activities on the continent, diplomatic missions, some whispered, while others suggested more clandestine endeavors. What was known for certain was his immense wealth, impeccable lineage, and complete indifference to the marriage-minded schemes that had erupted upon his return. She watched as he descended the steps with unhurried grace, accepting Lady Harrington's effusive welcome with polite reserve. Unlike many of his peers, he did not immediately seek out the most beautiful debutantes or the most influential matrons. Instead, he engaged in brief conversation with several gentlemen before accepting a glass of champagne and withdrawing to observe the proceedings. Much as she was doing, their gazes met across the crowded room, a chance alignment that Alexandra immediately sought to break. She lowered her eyes, turning her attention to the intricate pattern of the parquet floor. When she dared to look up again, the Duke had been surrounded by a cluster of eager conversation partners, his tall figure obscured by the press of admirers. Alexandra released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had no desire to draw the attention of a man like the Duke of Lytharby. Men of power were the most dangerous of all. They took what they wanted with impunity, and society applauded them for it. "Miss Zimmerman, is it not?" The voice behind her was deep and cultured, carrying the unmistakable authority of one accustomed to command. Alexandra turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs as she found herself face to face with the very man she had been determined to avoid. Up close, the Duke was even more imposing, his grey eyes shrewd and penetrating beneath dark brows. "Your Grace," she acknowledged with a perfect curtsy, keeping her voice steady through force of will. "You honor me with your attention." "Do I?" His lips curved into something not quite a smile. "I was merely seeking a moment's respite from the more enthusiastic elements of this gathering. You appeared similarly inclined towards solitude." Alexandra regarded him warily. "I find observation often more rewarding than participation, Your Grace." "A philosophical stance," he remarked, studying her with unexpected intensity, "though I wonder if it is born of preference or circumstance." The implication that he knew of her circumstances, her disgrace, was unmistakable. Alexandra felt heat rising to her cheeks, but she refused to show discomfort. "Perhaps both, Your Grace. Not everyone is suited to perpetual performance." "Indeed." He sipped his champagne, his gaze never leaving her face. "I have found London society unchanged in its essential nature despite my years abroad. The same ambitions, the same hypocrisies, merely new faces playing ancient roles. While some of us are confined to roles not of our choosing," Alexandra replied before she could censor herself. Instead of taking offense, the Duke's expression showed a flicker of genuine interest. "Precisely so, Miss Zimmerman, which makes those who acknowledge the charade all the more intriguing." The orchestra struck up the opening notes of a waltz, and to Alexandra's astonishment, the Duke set aside his glass on a nearby table. "Would you do me the honor of this dance, Miss Zimmerman?" Alexandra stared at him in disbelief. "Your Grace, she faltered, acutely aware that numerous gazes had turned in their direction. "I fear I would be a disappointing partner. I have not danced in some years." "Then we shall reacquaint you with the practice," he said simply, extending his gloved hand. Alexandra knew she should refuse. To accept would draw precisely the kind of attention she had spent years avoiding. Yet something in his steady gaze, a challenge perhaps, or an understanding she couldn't quite decipher, made her place her hand in his. "Very well, Your Grace, though I warn you, your reputation may suffer for the association." His lips quirked. "My reputation has weathered far worse than dancing with an intelligent woman, Miss Zimmerman." As he led her onto the floor, Alexandra felt the weight of hundreds of eyes following their progress. The Countess of Harrington looked as though she had swallowed something sour. Her cousin's wife gaped openly, and throughout the ballroom, fans fluttered frantically as gossip spread like wildfire. The Duke placed his hand at her waist, maintaining the proper distance as they took position. "Ignore them," he murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Focus on the music and on counting the steps if you must. 1, 2, 3. And then they were moving, swept into the circle of dancers. Alexandra's initial stiffness gradually melted as muscle memory returned. The Duke was an excellent partner, guiding her with subtle pressure rather than forcing her movements. For the first time in years, she felt something close to graceful. "You dance beautifully, Miss Zimmerman," he observed as they turned through a particularly complex figure. "Your concerns were unfounded." "You are kind to say so, Your Grace." Alexandra allowed herself to meet his gaze directly. "Though I suspect your skill compensates for my shortcomings. I neither flatter nor offer false comfort, Miss Zimmerman. You would do well to remember that." There was something in his tone, a gravity, a certainty, that resonated within her. For the briefest moment, Alexandra felt seen in a way she had not experienced in years. Not as a fallen woman, not as an object of pity or scorn, but simply as herself. The sensation was so startling that she nearly missed a step. "Careful," the Duke murmured, his hand tightening slightly at her waist to steady her. "The Earl of Pendleton has had too much port and is leading his partner erratically." Alexandra regained her composure, though her pulse remained traitorously accelerated. "Thank you, Your Grace. I confess the floor seems more crowded than I recall." "That is because every unmarried lady and their ambitious mamma is attempting to maneuver into our vicinity," he replied dryly. "You have made me the object of considerable envy by monopolizing my attention." Alexandra couldn't help the soft laugh that escaped her. "I rather think it is you who has monopolized mine, Your Grace. I had planned a quiet evening of systematic avoidance. Then I have disrupted your strategy. My apologies." His eyes, however, showed no hint of remorse. "Perhaps I might make amends by offering you a moment's fresh air when the dance concludes. The terrace should be relatively deserted, given the temperature." Warning bells sounded in Alexandra's mind. Accepting a private moment with a gentleman, even one as high-ranking as a duke, would only fuel the growing speculation. And yet, the thought of returning to her role as a shadow at the edge of the ballroom suddenly seemed unbearably bleak. A brief respite would be welcome, she found herself saying as the final notes of the waltz faded. The Duke led her from the floor with impeccable correctness, offering his arm to guide her toward the French doors that opened onto the terrace. As they passed through the crowd, Alexandra heard the susurration of whispers following in their wake. "Your dance partner, the Zimmerman girl, ruined years ago. Why would the Duke?" She kept her gaze fixed forward, her posture rigid with the effort of appearing unaffected. The Duke, however, seemed entirely unconcerned by the murmurs that surrounded them. The night air struck Alexandra's heated skin like a physical blow as they stepped onto the terrace. Stars glittered overhead in a clear winter sky, and their breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. The Duke released her arm once they were beyond the doors, but remained beside her as they approached the stone balustrade. "Better?" he inquired, studying her profile. "Yes, thank you." Alexandra drew her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "Though I fear I've caused you to become the subject of unfortunate speculation." The Duke's expression hardened. "Do you imagine I care for the opinions of people who would ostracize a young woman for a single indiscretion, while celebrating men who commit far greater transgressions?" Alexandra turned to him in surprise, searching his face for signs of mockery or calculation. She found none. "Most gentlemen of your rank would be considerably more concerned with appearances," she observed cautiously. "I am not most gentlemen, Miss Zimmerman." There was a quiet certainty in his voice. "And I have seen enough of the world to form my own judgments, rather than accepting those of society without question." "A dangerous philosophy, Your Grace, particularly for a man of your position." "Perhaps," he turned to face her fully. "Yet I find myself increasingly impatient with the hypocrisies of our social order. You were, what, 21 when you were ruined?" Alexandra flinched at the direct reference to her disgrace. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the distant strains of music from the ballroom. "Young, lightly sheltered, and confronted with the practiced seduction of a man known for his conquests." The Duke's assessment was matter of fact. "While Sir James Hawthorne continues to be welcomed in the finest homes in England, having suffered no consequences whatsoever for his role in the affair." Alexandra stared at him, stunned by his frank assessment, and by the realization that he had clearly investigated her history. "You seem remarkably well informed about my past, Your Grace." "I make it a habit to know the histories of interesting people, Miss Zimmerman." His gaze was unapologetic. "And you struck me as interesting from the moment I observed you watching the room with such careful attention." She should have been offended by his presumption, yet Alexandra found herself oddly gratified by his interest. "And what conclusion have you drawn from your investigations, Your Grace?" "That you are a woman of intelligence and character who has endured an unjust sentence with remarkable dignity." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "And that perhaps, like myself, you have come to believe that genuine connection is impossible in a world governed by such arbitrary and cruel standards." Alexandra felt a peculiar sensation in her chest, as though something long frozen had begun, painfully, to thaw. The Duke had articulated with uncanny precision the belief that had sustained her through years of isolation, that love and trust were luxuries she could no longer afford. "Your Grace," she began, uncertain what she intended to say. "Lucian," he interrupted, "when we are not performing for the audience behind those doors, I would prefer you use my name." The intimacy of the request startled her. "That would be most improper." "As is this entire conversation. Yet here we stand." His lips curved in a genuine smile that transformed his austere features. "I find I have little patience remaining for propriety that serves no purpose beyond maintaining artificial barriers." Alexandra found herself returning his smile, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. "Very well, Lucian, though only when we are not observed." "A reasonable compromise, Alexandra." The sound of her given name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver through her that had nothing to do with the winter chill. "We should return," she said, suddenly aware of how long they had been absent, "before speculation transforms into certainty." "Are you so concerned with their opinions, even now?" he asked, studying her closely. "I have learned to live within the constraints society has placed upon me," Alexandra replied carefully. "It has been survivable, but should those constraints tighten further, then your situation would become untenable." Lucian nodded, understanding immediately. "Forgive me, I have been thoughtless. Of course we shall return." He offered his arm once more, and Alexandra placed her gloved hand upon it, acutely aware of the solid strength beneath the fine fabric of his evening coat. As they re-entered the ballroom, Lady Harrington intercepted them, her smile brittle with disapproval. "Your Grace, I believe Lady Penelope has been most eagerly awaiting an introduction. Miss Zimmerman, your cousin's wife, was inquiring after you just moments ago. Something about retiring early, I believe." The dismissal was unmistakable. Alexandra began to withdraw her hand from the Duke's arm, but to her surprise, he covered it with his own, keeping her firmly at his side. How fortunate that we have returned in time to address both matters, he replied smoothly. Though I must insist on claiming Miss Zimmerman for the supper dance before I make any new acquaintances. We were discussing Italian architecture, and I find her observations most illuminating. Lady Harrington's face registered shock before she quickly composed her features. Of course, Your Grace, how educational your evening must be. As the Countess retreated, Alexandra turned to the Duke with wide eyes. Italian architecture, I've never set foot outside England. A minor detail, he replied with a hint of mischief. I have spent considerable time in Florence and Rome. By the end of the evening, you will know enough to convince any listener of your expertise. You cannot seriously intend to partner me for another dance, Alexandra protested, though a treacherous warmth spread through her at the thought. Once might be dismissed as curiosity or courtesy, twice will be interpreted as something else entirely. Lucian regarded her steadily. Would that be so terrible? For me, potentially ruinous all over again. For you. Merely puzzling and possibly disappointing when you discover I am not what you imagine. And what do I imagine, Alexandra? His voice had dropped lower, the deep timbre sending another unsettling tremor through her. A mystery, a challenge. Perhaps a project of rehabilitation. She met his gaze directly. I am none of those things, Your Grace. I am simply a woman who has learned harsh lessons about the nature of society and my place within it. Then we have that much in common. Something in his expression shifted, revealing a glimpse of old pain quickly masked. I too have learned harsh lessons, the hardest being that titles and wealth provide no protection against loss, only the illusion of control. Before Alexandra could respond to this unexpected confession, the orchestra began the opening notes of the supper dance. Lucian extended his hand, a silent question in his eyes. Against every rational inclination, Alexandra placed her hand in his. This dance was different, a country dance that required them to separate and rejoin to interact with other couples in the set. Alexandra was conscious of the speculative gazes following her movements, the whispered conversations that halted when she approached, only to resume with greater animation as she passed. Yet each time she returned to Lucian's side, his steady presence anchored her against the storm of gossip swirling around them. You realize you're creating a sensation, she murmured during one brief moment together in the pattern of the dance. Good, he replied simply. Perhaps it will provide them something worthwhile to discuss, rather than the usual tedious speculation about dowries and bloodlines. Alexandra couldn't help but laugh, the sound drawing even more attention. You are either remarkably brave or utterly heedless of consequence. Neither. I am merely a man who knows his own mind and the extent of his influence. His hand clasped hers as they turned. Few would dare openly censure a duke, regardless of his choice of dance partner. The dance separated them again before Alexandra could formulate a response. When they next came together, the final movements of the dance were beginning. Supper will be announced momentarily, Lucian said, as the music concluded. Would you permit me to escort you? Alexandra hesitated, acutely aware that accepting would constitute a public statement of some kind, though what exactly she could not say. My cousin will undoubtedly be delighted that the Duke of Lytharby has shown such marked attention to his relation, Lucian finished for her. I observed his reaction to our first dance. He appears to be calculating the potential advantages with great enthusiasm. Alexandra felt a flush of shame at the accuracy of his assessment. Edward would indeed view the Duke's interest as a potential path to social advancement, regardless of the damage Alexandra's reputation might inflict on such aspirations. Very well, she conceded, though I warn you the scrutiny will be considerable. I have endured worse, Lucian replied cryptically. He offered his arm once more, guiding her toward the supper room as the formal announcement was made. The meal passed in a blur of heightened awareness. Alexandra found herself seated beside the Duke at a table that included several prominent members of society, all of whom regarded her with barely concealed curiosity. Yet Lucian engaged her in conversation about art, literature, and his travels with such natural ease that eventually, others at the table were drawn in as well. You mentioned an interest in botanical illustration, Miss Zimmerman, he commented as they were served the final course. Have you pursued the subject yourself? Alexandra nearly choked on her wine. Her secret occupation was not something she had shared with him or anyone outside of her publisher and Mary. I dabble, she managed, wondering how he had discovered this particular piece of information, though my efforts are strictly amateur. I find that difficult to believe, Lucian replied, his gaze knowing. I recently acquired a collection of remarkable studies of English wildflowers published under the name A.Z. Thornfield. The attention to detail is extraordinary, hardly the work of a dilettante. Alexandra stared at him, heart pounding. He knew, somehow, he had discovered her pseudonym and her secret means of supporting herself. The revelation left her feeling exposed, vulnerable in a way that even the gossip about her scandal had not achieved. You flatter me unjustly, Your Grace, she said carefully. Though I am familiar with the work you mention, quite adequate renderings though lacking certain refinements. On the contrary, he persisted, his voice low enough that only she could hear, I consider them masterful. Particularly impressive given that the artist is entirely self-taught and working under considerable constraint. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Alexandra knew with absolute certainty that he had investigated her far more thoroughly than she had imagined. The question was why, and what he intended to do with the information he had gathered. The remainder of the evening passed in a strange, dreamlike state for Alexandra. After supper, Lucian claimed her for one final dance, a bold statement that could not be misinterpreted by anyone present. As they moved together, Alexandra found herself studying his face, searching for clues to his motivation. You're troubled, he observed as they turned through a figure. Confused, she corrected. I cannot fathom why you have singled me out for such particular attention, nor how you came to know details of my life that I have carefully guarded. Lucian's expression grew serious. Would you believe me if I said I recognized something in you from the moment I saw you, a quality of character, a kindred spirit, perhaps? I would find it difficult to credit, Alexandra admitted. Men of your station do not typically seek kindred spirits among disgraced women of limited means. And yet here we are. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. I have spent my life confined by expectations, Alexandra. My marriage was arranged to unite two ancient bloodlines, with no consideration for compatibility or affection. My every action has been scrutinized and judged according to standards I had no part in creating. Is it so hard to believe that I might recognize a fellow prisoner when I see one? The raw honesty in his voice caught Alexandra off guard. For the first time, she considered that the Duke of Lytharby might be as constrained by his position as she was by her disgrace, albeit in vastly different ways. Even prisoners can form unlikely alliances, she said quietly as the dance drew to a close. His eyes warmed. Precisely my thought. As they left the dance floor, Alexandra knew the evening had irreversibly altered her carefully constructed existence. Whether for good or ill remained to be seen, but the careful walls she had built around her heart had developed hairline fractures, dangerous, unpredictable weaknesses in her emotional fortress. I shall call upon you tomorrow, Lucian said, as they reached her cousin, who bowed so deeply he nearly toppled forward. Perhaps we might continue our discussion of Italian architecture in a less crowded setting. That would be most kind, Your Grace, Alexandra replied, aware of her cousin's barely contained excitement beside her. As their carriage pulled away from the Harrington estate, Alexandra endured her cousin and his wife's effusive speculations with outward calm. Inwardly, however, her thoughts churned in confusion. The Duke of Lytharby had upended her carefully ordered existence in a single evening, awakening possibilities she had long since buried. Yet experience had taught her the bitter lesson that hope was the most dangerous emotion of all. And despite the Duke's apparent sincerity, Alexandra could not quite bring herself to believe that fate had suddenly, inexplicably, dealt her a winning hand. The following weeks transformed Alexandra's life in ways she could never have anticipated. True to his word, Lucian called the day after the ball, bringing with him a portfolio of architectural sketches from his travels in Italy. Alexandra's cousin and his wife hovered anxiously throughout the visit, their transparent eagerness to promote the connection making Alexandra cringe with embarrassment. Yet Lucian seemed unperturbed, directing his conversation primarily to Alexandra while maintaining just enough civility toward her relations to prevent offense. When he departed, he requested permission to escort her on a drive through Hyde Park the following afternoon, an invitation that sent her cousin's household into paroxysms of excitement. "This is beyond our wildest hopes," her cousin's wife declared, already mentally calculating the social advantages of a connection to the Duke of Lytharby. "Though I confess, I cannot fathom what he sees in you, Alexandra. Not that you aren't pleasant enough, but after your unfortunate history." "Indeed," Alexandra agreed dryly, "it is most perplexing." The drive through Hyde Park proved to be merely the first of many such outings. Lucian called regularly, each visit carefully orchestrated to maintain propriety while deepening their acquaintance. They discussed art, literature, and politics with a freedom Alexandra had never before experienced with a gentleman. Lucian valued her opinions, challenged her assumptions, and listened with genuine interest to her perspectives. More startling still, he openly acknowledged her work as an illustrator, bringing her rare botanical texts from his library and commissioning a series of illustrations for a private collection. The payment he offered was far beyond the modest sums she typically received, allowing Alexandra to accelerate her plans for independence. "You need not be so generous," she protested when he presented the commission. "The work itself is reward enough." "I pay what the work is worth," Lucian replied firmly. "Your talent deserves recognition, Alexandra. That society would force you to hide behind a masculine pseudonym is yet another indictment of its failings." Such sentiments, expressed with unwavering conviction, gradually weakened Alexandra's resistance. Despite her determination to protect herself from further heartache, she found herself drawn to Lucian's integrity, his subtle humor, and his unflinching honesty. Society, meanwhile, watched their growing attachment with avid interest. Alexandra's past remained a subject of whispers, but increasingly, those whispers were tinged with curiosity rather than condemnation. The Duke of Lytharby's marked preference had elevated her standing by association, though Alexandra harbored no illusions that this tentative acceptance would survive should Lucian's attention waver. 6 weeks after the Harrington ball, Alexandra sat in her cousin's drawing room, adding delicate details to a sketch of an alpine gentian. The afternoon light was perfect for capturing the subtle violet-blue hues of the flower, and she was so absorbed in her work that she did not immediately register the commotion in the entrance hall. "Miss Zimmerman," her cousin's wife burst into the room, her face flushed with excitement. "You must prepare yourself. The Duke's carriage has just arrived, and he is accompanied by his sister, the Marchioness of Cavendish." Alexandra set aside her drawing with careful composure, though her heart had begun to race. Lady Caroline Lockwood, the Marchioness of Cavendish, was known for her impeccable taste, formidable intellect, and fierce loyalty to her brother. That Lucian had brought her to call could only signify a significant development in their relationship. "I shall receive them, of course," Alexandra said, rising to check her appearance in the mirror. Her simple day dress of deep green merino wool was modest but becoming, and her hair was neatly arranged. She would not shame Lucian by appearing unkempt before his sister. The visitors were shown into the drawing-room moments later. Lucian entered first, his tall figure commanding as always. Behind him came a slender woman whose resemblance to her brother was immediately apparent in the firm set of her jaw and the penetrating quality of her gaze. "Miss Zimmerman," Lucian said, his voice warming as he bowed over her hand. "May I present my sister, Lady Caroline Cavendish? Caroline, this is Miss Alexandra Zimmerman, about whom I have spoken so often." "Miss Zimmerman," the Marchioness extended her hand, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. "My brother has indeed spoken of you with great admiration. I confess I have been most eager to make your acquaintance." "You honor me, Lady Cavendish," Alexandra replied, meeting the other woman's assessing gaze with quiet dignity. "Please be seated. I shall ring for tea." As the conversation progressed, Alexandra found herself subjected to the Marchioness's subtle but thorough evaluation. Lady Caroline inquired about Alexandra's interests, her opinions on various literary works, and her knowledge of current affairs with the practiced ease of a skilled interrogator. Through it all, Lucian observed with a slight smile, occasionally contributing to the discussion, but primarily allowing his sister to conduct her assessment unimpeded. "I understand you are an accomplished artist," Lady Caroline remarked as she accepted a second cup of tea. "Lucian has shown me some of your botanical studies. They display remarkable precision and sensitivity." Alexandra inclined her head. "You are kind to say so, Lady Cavendish. Drawing has long been a source of solace and satisfaction for me." "Not mere kindness, Miss Zimmerman. I do not offer empty compliments." The Marchioness set down her cup with deliberate precision. "Nor does my brother form attachments lightly, which brings me to the purpose of our visit today." Alexandra felt her breath catch as Lady Caroline turned to Lucian with an expectant look. He rose from his seat, crossing to stand before Alexandra with an expression of such open tenderness that she felt momentarily disoriented. "Alexandra," he began, taking her hand in his. "These past weeks have confirmed what I suspected from our first meeting, that in you I have found a woman of remarkable character, intelligence, and grace. Someone who sees the world clearly without illusion, yet retains compassion and dignity despite life's injustices." Alexandra stared up at him, scarcely able to believe what appeared to be happening. "Lucian, please," he said softly. "Allow me to finish. I came to that ball 6 weeks ago with no expectation beyond enduring another tedious social obligation. Instead, I found you, a kindred spirit who understands what it means to live constrained by circumstances beyond one's control, yet refuses to be defined by those constraints." To Alexandra's astonishment, Lucian lowered himself to one knee before her, still holding her hand in his. From his pocket he withdrew a small velvet box. "I love you, Alexandra Zimmerman, not despite your past but including it, for it has shaped you into the woman you are today. The woman I wish to make my Duchess, my partner, and my dearest companion for whatever years remain to us." He opened the box to reveal a ring of extraordinary beauty, an oval sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in platinum. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Alexandra felt as though the room had begun to spin around her. This moment, this impossible moment, could not be real. Men like the Duke of Lytharby did not marry women with ruined reputations and no fortune. It was not merely unlikely, it was contrary to every rule of society she had been taught to accept as immutable. "You cannot mean this," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "Your position, your family, society will never accept." "I mean it with every fiber of my being," Lucian interrupted, his gaze never wavering. "As for society, it will accept what I tell it to accept. My position affords me that much power at least. And I," Lady Caroline added from her seat, "will personally ensure that any who dare to slight my future sister-in-law find themselves unwelcome in homes that matter." Alexandra looked from Lucian's earnest face to his sister's determined expression, feeling the foundations of her carefully constructed worldview begin to crumble. For 5 years, she had believed herself unworthy of respect, of position, of love. She had accepted society's judgment as final and irrevocable. Yet here was a man who saw beyond that judgment to the woman beneath, who offered not just rehabilitation but partnership. "This is madness," she said softly. "Perhaps," Lucian acknowledged with the hint of a smile. "But it is a madness I choose with clear eyes and full heart. The question is whether you will choose it with me." Alexandra drew a shaking breath, searching his face for any sign of doubt or reservation. She found none, only steadfast certainty and a depth of feeling that mirrored her own carefully hidden emotions. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "yes, I will marry you, Lucian." His smile transformed his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. The sapphire caught the afternoon light, scattering blue reflections across the drawing-room walls, a visible symbol of the impossible becoming possible. As Lucian rose to his feet, drawing Alexandra up with him, Lady Caroline approached to embrace her warmly. "Welcome to the family, my dear. I have longed to see my brother find a worthy match, one based on genuine affection rather than calculation. I believe he has exceeded my hopes." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Lucian insisted on a short engagement, unwilling to give society time to mount significant opposition to their union. Announcements appeared in all the major newspapers, the formal language disguising the scandal that such a match represented. Alexandra found herself swept into a world that had previously been closed to her. Lucian's position meant that invitations now flooded in from families who had shunned her for years. Many came out of curiosity or calculation, but a surprising number seemed genuinely pleased by the match, particularly those who had known Lucian since childhood and wished for his happiness. Lady Caroline proved true to her word, becoming Alexandra's staunchest ally in navigating the complexities of her new position. Under the Marchioness's guidance, Alexandra was fitted for an entirely new wardrobe, instructed in the intricacies of ducal protocol, and gradually introduced to the social circle that would become her own upon marriage. Not all reactions were positive, of course. Some members of the aristocracy made their disapproval known through pointed absences or barely veiled insults. Sir James Hawthorne, the architect of Alexandra's disgrace, had the temerity to approach Lucian at his club, offering insincere congratulations tinged with innuendo. "I understand felicitations are in order, Lytharby," Sir James drawled after cornering Lucian in the smoking room. "Miss Zimmerman is a spirited choice. I can personally attest to her enthusiasm." The silence that fell over the room was immediate and absolute. Witnesses would later describe how the Duke's expression never changed, yet something in his eyes caused Sir James to take an involuntary step backward. "Sir James," Lucian replied, his voice pitched to carry to every corner of the room, "I find myself in the unusual position of being grateful to you." Sir James blinked in confusion. "Grateful? Indeed." Lucian sipped his brandy with perfect composure. "Had you possessed even a modicum of honor or decency 5 years ago, Miss Zimmerman might well have married you or some other gentleman of similar character. Instead, your contemptible behavior freed her from what would undoubtedly have been a lifetime of misery, leaving her available to make a far more advantageous match. So yes, I thank you for your role in bringing about my current happiness." The devastating civility of the response left Sir James speechless, while appreciative murmurs rippled through the assembled gentlemen. By evening, the exchange had been reported in every drawing-room in London, substantially altering the narrative surrounding Alexandra's past indiscretion. When Lucian recounted the incident to Alexandra that evening, she stared at him in astonishment. "You defended me by thanking him." "I stated nothing but the truth," Lucian replied, taking her hand in his. "Had your life followed a different path, we might never have met, and that, my love, would have been the true tragedy." Such moments gradually reinforced Alexandra's fragile confidence, helping her to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she might successfully transition from scandalous spinster to Duchess of Lytharby. Yet as their wedding day approached, a persistent doubt continued to trouble her. One evening, as they sat together in Lucian's library reviewing plans for renovations to their country estate, Alexandra finally gave voice to her concern. "Are you certain you will not regret this?" she asked abruptly. "That someday you will not look at me and see only the limitations I bring to your position rather than whatever qualities currently blind you to them?" Lucian set aside the architectural drawings, giving her his full attention. "Is that what you believe, that I am blind to your past?" "Not blind, perhaps," Alexandra amended, "but possibly overly optimistic about society's capacity for forgiveness." "I harbor no illusions about society," Lucian replied, his expression serious. "There will always be those who whisper behind their fans or make cutting remarks disguised as pleasantries. But I have learned through bitter experience that others' approval is a poor foundation for happiness." He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "My first marriage was everything society deemed appropriate: impeccable bloodlines, substantial dowry, mutual family connections. It was also devoid of genuine affection, intellectual companionship, or shared purpose. When my wife died in childbirth after just 2 years, I mourned her loss as I would any human tragedy, but I could not pretend we had achieved anything resembling true partnership." Alexandra squeezed his hand, touched by this rare reference to his first marriage. "I am sorry for your loss nonetheless." As am I, but that experience taught me the emptiness of pursuing society's approval at the expense of personal fulfillment. His gaze was steady, unflinching. I will never regret choosing a woman of substance, character, and genuine compatibility over one who simply meets arbitrary standards of acceptability. The conviction in his voice finally penetrated the last of Alexandra's doubts. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully embrace the future that Lucian offered, not as an impossible dream that might shatter at any moment, but as a reality they would build together. "I believe you," she said simply. His smile held all the warmth she had come to treasure. Finally. 3 weeks later, Alexandra stood in the Duchess's chambers at Lytharby House, her wedding day dawning clear and bright outside the tall windows. Lady Caroline, supervised as maids, arranged Alexandra's hair in an elegant style, adorned with orange blossoms and small diamonds that had belonged to Lucian's mother. The wedding gown, created by London's most exclusive modiste, was a masterpiece of ivory silk and Brussels lace. As Alexandra regarded her reflection, she scarcely recognized the poised, radiant woman who gazed back at her. "You look every inch a duchess," Lady Caroline declared with satisfaction. "Lucian will be rendered speechless." Alexandra smiled, a new serenity having replaced her earlier anxieties. "I find I care less about appearing duchess-like than about being a worthy partner to your brother." "And that," Lady Caroline replied, "is precisely why you will excel at both." Centre. George's Church in Hanover Square was filled to capacity when Alexandra arrived. The cream of London society had turned out in force, curiosity overcoming disapproval for many who had initially resisted the match. As the organ music swelled and Alexandra began her walk down the aisle on her cousin's arm, she kept her gaze fixed on Lucian's tall figure waiting before the altar. He turned as she approached, and the naked emotion in his expression, joy, wonder, love, banished the last lingering ghost of Alexandra's past. In that moment, she was not the disgraced Miss Zimmerman, but simply a woman walking toward the man who saw her completely and loved her anyway. The ceremony passed in a blur of ancient words and solemn promises. When the Archbishop pronounced them husband and wife, Duke and Duchess of Lytharby, Alexandra felt not triumph or vindication, but a profound sense of rightness, as though after years of dislocation, she had finally found her true place in the world. The wedding breakfast that followed was a glittering affair, with hundreds of guests crowding Lytharby House to offer congratulations and satisfy their curiosity about the new Duchess. Alexandra received them with gracious composure, Lucian a constant presence at her side. "You are magnificent," he murmured during a brief moment alone between receiving lines. "Every person in this room is revising their opinion of you with each passing minute." "Let them revise," Alexandra replied with newfound confidence. "I find I no longer require their approval to know my own worth." Lucian's laugh was rich with genuine delight. "And that, my Duchess, is the greatest transformation of all." Later that evening, as their carriage carried them away from London toward Lytharby's country estate for a private honeymoon, Alexandra rested her head against her husband's shoulder. The gold band on her finger caught the lantern light, a tangible symbol of the journey that had begun with a single dance 6 months earlier. "Happy?" Lucian asked softly, his arm drawing her closer. Alexandra considered the question, thinking of all that had changed since that fateful night at the Countess of Harrington's ball. She had entered that ballroom believing her fate was fixed, that she would forever remain on the margins of society, defined by a single mistake made in trusting the wrong man. Now she was a duchess, respected if not universally accepted, with a husband who valued her mind as well as her heart, and a future limited only by their shared imagination. "Extraordinarily so," she answered, lifting her face to his. "Though I confess I still find it difficult to believe this is not some elaborate dream from which I will awaken." "If it is a dream," Lucian said, his eyes warm with promise, "then it is one we share. And I intend to ensure it continues for many years to come." As his lips met hers in a tender kiss, Alexandra silently thanked whatever twist of fate had placed them in the same ballroom on that winter night, and whatever courage had allowed her to accept his hand for that one last dance that had changed everything.